Hello, I'm Arik Korman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters, and the parent of a fifth grade son in the public school system who needs special education services. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to build a brighter future for every Washington student. Our website is educationvoters.org. We believe that education is a tool for justice. The project of dismantling the systems that perpetuate the racial injustice experienced by communities of color begins in schools. We believe every child deserves an excellent public education that provides an equal opportunity for success. In order to achieve this, we must pursue radical change in our school systems for equity, justice, and liberation. We must build schools and systems that honor the humanity in every student. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series 7 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's LEVinar is about retooling during the pandemic, serving youth in foster care statewide. Thousands of youth and young adults and children in foster care statewide have been impacted by COVID-19. Already vulnerable before the pandemic, youth saw their immediate needs change dramatically with the technology assistance for online school surfacing as the first obstacle to overcome. Many young adults living independently lost their jobs, which increased the need for rent assistance and other critical supports. Our guest today is Dawn Rains, the Chief Policy and Strategy Officer at Treehouse. She will share how the nonprofit organization took immediate action to respond to the challenges of COVID-19, outline how we can best support students in foster care, and answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is the space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or at info@educationvoters.org. As Chief Policy and Strategy Officer, Dawn Rains leads policy, advocacy, and long-term strategy for Treehouse. She has more than 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, fund development, and legislative advocacy. Dawn holds a Master of Public Administration and a certificate in fundraising management from the University of Washington. She also is a former foster parent. Welcome, Dawn. And I will stop my screen share. I also want to mention that Lisa Chin was scheduled to join us, but unfortunately she's having technical issues in Eastern Washington. So we are pleased as punch, as it were, to have Dawn with us.
Thanks, Arik.
You're so welcome, Dawn. So I understand that Treehouse serves more than 8,000 youth statewide who have experienced foster care. What exactly does Treehouse do?
So we provide education and other essential supports for children, youth, and foster care across our state. We're providing intensive education supports to about 1,200 youth in foster care in high school in about 9 counties or 10 counties statewide now. But overall, we partner with youth in foster care to ensure that they have both a childhood and a future. We have a store that provides clothing and other material supports that they may need. We provide intensive education supports. We do provide funding for education-specific needs, activities, camps. We also make sure that every youth in foster care that requests one gets a significant holiday gift. We have a strong focus on academic and career mentoring, coaching, and supports. And just one of our key programs, Graduation Success, supports high school completion, which is a huge issue for youth who experience foster care. Nationwide, only about 50% of youth in care graduate high school on time, and fewer than 3% will complete a 4-year degree by their mid-20s. We also fund things that are essential for kind of that transition to adulthood. So things like paying for driver's ed and car insurance, which are often huge barriers for youth in terms of jobs, getting to work, getting to school, particularly in our rural areas.
Wow, that's a lot of programs and services. And I'm sure you've had to adapt during the COVID-19 pandemic. How quickly did you start to make changes once the crisis started? And how have your services evolved since then?
We moved really quickly. We have staff serving youth in over 40 school districts, so on a daily basis. And so immediately they kind of went into triage mode. Do our young
Mm.
people have access to the immediate basic needs that they might be experiencing? Foster parents and relative caregivers, usually we're only having to provide generally one meal a day, and often now it's 3 meals a day. Do they know about the food assistance programs that districts were offering? Did they have all those immediate basic needs? And once we kind of got past the basic need moment, the next really immediate need was around technology devices and remote or internet access.
Yeah.
Did our youth have all of the technology they needed to be able to engage in distance learning that the districts were offering? So we made sure we were navigating community resources in the event that districts or other sources of support for those technology needs were not available. Treehouse really stepped in and provided some of those key needs. I would also say cell phones have been really critical as well. Just being able to get in touch with our students has been a bit of a challenge. The other thing you mentioned at the top was that, many of our independent youth, and both youth in high school and youth who have now transitioned to post-secondary, lost jobs kind of right away. They were kind of among the first because many of them work in the service industry, or maybe their hours were greatly reduced. So we've done things like expand rental assistance, gift cards for food. Our staff are becoming somewhat expert at helping navigate public systems and applying for unemployment
Mm-hmm.
for some of our young people. So skills that we didn't necessarily think we would be using, but have certainly, I think, provided kind of a critical gap, filled a critical gap during this time.
Yeah, that's a lot of services, and yeah, making connections to other resources, that's really key. I'm wondering what that looks like. Like if there is a shortage of technology devices, for example, or cell phones, like you mentioned. I mean, how do you make those connections to community resources? What does that look like?
Yeah, we kind of have a philosophy that we only want to provide the thing that the part that Treehouse needs to do, and so either our unique expertise or the resources that we have available in the event that youth needs something that Treehouse can't provide for whatever reason. Really trying to connect in communities around the state, whether it's in Spokane or Thurston County. We want to know who the other key providers are in that community and work in tandem, make sure we're not duplicating service and also maximizing the benefit for our young people. The other thing we try to really do is work alongside young people to help them kind of navigate some of that on their own, so they start to learn some of those skills around self-advocacy and sort of being proactive in meeting their own needs.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned that one of the biggest needs is just being able to get through high school because the graduation rate is 50%. So how do you support youth to help them make that transition from high school and beyond to actually reach that milestone even of graduating?
Absolutely. So we have Treehouse education specialists who work with a caseload of young people, and they meet with students at least weekly, even during the summer, to keep them on track toward graduation. Every time they meet, they check in on how's attendance going, how's behavior going, how's course performance going, what's up with your missing science homework.
Wow.
We really also work with them to set their own goals. We really have a youth-driven model where we, based on this crazy idea that, young people are much more motivated to pursue the goals when they set them themselves. And then we can use Treehouse resources to really support working toward those goals. So sometimes we might set up an incentive plan. If a student has a goal that they want to make it on time to first period every day this week or every day this month, we'll have set a little incentive that will help kind of reinforce the behavior and get them there. But really setting goals, making plans to get there, and then kind of working the plan. What are you going to do this week? What are you going to do next week? Do you need my help and support, or are you good? So that they're doing both that. They're being both self-determined and learning to self-advocate.
That's great. And and in terms of the actual outreach, it sounds like you use like either Zoom or Microsoft Teams or one of those virtual platforms or just a cell phone call. Is that primarily how you do the actual outreach?
Yeah, it really kind of depends on the young person themselves. But even before COVID, our staff would text. Is often a preferred method of communication for young people
Yeah.
between in-person visits. But yeah, our staff have been reaching out with Zoom meetings, FaceTime if it's appropriate, or phone calls just to kind of stay in touch, make sure students are staying on track, engaging, getting their homework done, meeting all of for our seniors, making sure all of their graduation requirements were getting wrapped up. So yeah, we've just sort of adapted. We're using every form of technology we possibly can.
Yeah. And what does that look like during the summer, especially a summer where there is the stay-at-home order?
Yeah, this one is particularly tricky. In a normal year, we would be creating summer plans. So are you planning to work this summer? Are there camps or other learning opportunities you want to engage in? Is this an opportunity to go to summer school and make up either sort of remediate basic skills or make up credits that might be missing because of transitions that students
Mhm.
have had. Some of those things are happening in individual districts, and so we're taking advantage of everything that the districts are offering. Some camps have moved to virtual, and
Mhm.
so just trying to connect. But this summer is a particularly challenging one in terms of having less opportunities to offer students.
Right.
And so we are concerned about some of the learning loss that has happened and making sure that that students are having an opportunity to catch up on curriculum that they might have missed. The other thing is we've seen some students actually having to change placements and change schools kind of in the
Mm.
middle of all of this, which has been super challenging. So we're just wanting to make sure that they're staying on track as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. I'm curious too, what are you hearing from students? Like, how are they doing? Because I understand you did a survey a few weeks into the pandemic about their needs. What did you find out from that survey? And also, what are you hearing from them now since we are in this summer period? Like, how are they doing mentally too?
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting and really interesting time. Our staff did complete surveys about 1,300 of the students that we're serving statewide, and that's about 13% of the 10,000 total youth in care. But it's about a third of the students in foster care in the K through 12 system. So it's a fairly good representation. Immediately, this survey was only a few weeks into the pandemic, and so at that point, about half of them were expressing some kind of immediate unmet need,
Yeah.
food support, hygiene support, that kind of thing. Cell phones were a kind of an immediate request, and
Mhm.
then both youth and caregivers, I think, have been looking for enrichment activities during this time, something to keep you busy, positively
Mhm.
engaged. And we mentioned, of course, the technology needs that all of our students have had. We were actually happy to see about half of our students having no immediate resource needs, which I think is a
Mm.
testament to Treehouse continuing to maintain that same level of service.
Yeah.
Now that we're a little further in, I like to say I think we've done a really good job meeting some of the technical needs of youth.
Mhm.
The kind of the thing you can just deliver. I think we're challenged now more to meet the adaptive needs of young people. Many of our young people may not have a caregiver at home who has the
Mhm.
capacity for whatever reason to kind of support that at-home learning environment. This is also a group of young people who might be more tenuously kind of connected to school than a lot of young people, and so I think we're going to have some youth, I think, have kind of disengaged, that the online learning
Yeah.
process has not worked well for them for whatever reason. Um, it, I think we're going to have kind of a heavy re-engagement lift to do in the fall, and And we're concerned about what happens if in particular high schools don't go back to in-person education service. I think our caregivers are going to need something different from us in terms of the kinds of supports we provide to them in order to fulfill the role that they really need now.
Yeah, I was wondering about the re-engagement effort. What do you think that could look like in the fall?
Well, I think reaching out to every single young person, talking to them about their goals, making it, I think one thing we learned when we first launched this graduation success model 7 or 8 years ago was that it was our goal that youth graduate high school. It wasn't necessarily their goal. And so we had to, work to really make it relevant for young people. How is this a step on a path to get you to the life that you want? And so I think it's about re-engaging that motivation again around, again, this is a step. And also I think providing the kind of structure and support so that young person needs to be successful in this environment. And I think also making individualized connections between young people and their sort of their key connections at school. I think making sure that they're getting kind of both that instructional support, but also connecting and that kind of social emotional support. I think a lot of districts and actually a lot of youth and caregivers have gotten creative about how to stay connected to friends. And I do know that one of the things our students have really struggled with during this time is a lot of visits with their families have been disrupted. And so, but I think it is going to lead to a change in the child welfare system as well, because why were we not always doing Zoom meetings between youth and their parents midweek between in-person visits? So I think maybe it's also, this crisis is providing kind of, will lead to some innovation, both on the education side and also on the child welfare side.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to use the technology. And you've talked earlier about how youth in foster care are described often as our most vulnerable population. And you talk about things on your website, for example, that there are changes in care placements 3 times. Why is that such a concern?
I would say it is maybe one of the primary drivers of our youth struggling. And so not only do our youth graduating at, only on time at about 46%, they actually do worse in attendance. They get suspended and expelled more often on test scores. They get held back in grades more than their peers. And I think mobility is actually the primary driver. So every time a student has to change placements, there is law that says that youth have the right to stay in their same school when they come into foster care or change placements, if at all possible. But the realities of the child welfare system are that often, we have placement shortages. We're just looking for a safe place for that child to be and ideally, it's a strong placement and a good match for that young person. But sometimes that means that they have to move further than is logistically possible for them to remain in the same school. Well, every time they change schools, they lose 4 to 6 months of academic progress. They might have, because of local control, they have different graduation requirements. They may be at different places in the curriculum when they move. They move mid-quarter or mid-semester quite often. So we do have a lot on the books now, thanks in large part to Treehouse, about getting partial credit for work completed, even when they disrupt in the middle of a term. So a lot of our, Washington State history ends up being a huge barrier for our young people because some school districts teach it in 8th grade and some teach it in 9th grade. And if you change schools at the wrong time, you can miss it. And then all of a sudden you don't have a key graduation requirement.
Right.
So we do a lot to make sure that when students have to change schools, that credits transfer quickly, that they get placed in the right level classrooms, that school records come quickly. Also about 40% of our young people have qualifying disabilities that make them eligible for special education supports, who make sure their IEPs come with them. we remind school districts they don't have to wait to provide those services until they do their own evaluation. Maybe another evaluation isn't actually necessary. So we will help kind of make sure that students are getting tested and getting special education interventions that they need, and enforce some IEPs if that's necessary. That's partially why that mobility is so disruptive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that mobility lead to the foster care to prison pipeline? Is that a big contributor to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Across our country, we have about 440,000 children and youth in the foster care system who face a disproportionate risk of being incarcerated. The problem's so severe that 1/4 of youth who've experienced care become involved in the juvenile justice system within 2 years of leaving foster care. About 40% of the young people who are currently in our state's juvenile rehabilitation system experience foster care, and 80% of their families have had some interaction with the child welfare system, even if they haven't officially been in foster care. So there is a strong correlation. Last December, we did a convening. We were brought together educators, child welfare professionals, juvenile justice professionals, law enforcement, all to go to the Monroe Correctional Complex and work with a group of inmates called the Concerned Lifers organization. They have a subgroup within their group of men who were in the foster care system as children. And when you hear their stories, you kind of wonder how they could have ended up anywhere else. They were failed by the foster care system. They were almost universally suspended and expelled from school, and so kind of pushed out of the school system. And then they were failed by the juvenile justice system, which led to, sort of early, crimes, a lot of times related to just survival. And then, really kind of terrible sentencing laws and the 3 strikes you're out have led to many of them are spending their lives in prison after, I would say, we failed them. And so we're very concerned about disrupting. I think there are places along that entire pipeline that we could do better. So we're definitely focused on that.
That's great. Yeah, and I understand that as part of this, Treehouse is focusing a lot on racial equity. What else are you doing as an organization to advance racial equity at this time?
Absolutely. I would say we've been on a pretty intensive journey under the leadership of our former CEO, Janice Avery, for probably the last 7 years, when we set our goal that youth in foster care would graduate high school at the same rate as their peers with Plan for the Future. We knew that unless we address racial equity, there was no way we were going to achieve it. When we started, I would say about 15% of our staff were staff of color. Today, we're really proud that 43% of our staff are staff of color. I would say we have embedded racial equity in sort of everything that we do, and we're always striving to kind of go deeper. So, of course, we provide have provided all staff trainings, multiple days every year for the last several years. We discuss racial equity at every team meeting, at every all staff meeting. We each in our organization have our own personal racial equity professional development goals, where we, within the context of our work, are working to advance racial equity. So, for example, my role is policy and strategy. So my personal goal is about raising racial equity at all of the coalitions that I participate in, and also in conversations in the child welfare system around disparate outcomes. So those are a few of the things that we're doing on a regular basis. I would say, in the last several weeks, our commitment has really been reinforced and deepened. And we are working currently on a refreshed racial equity action plan, like throughout our organization, everything from hiring to onboarding to how we budget to how we make decisions, and then how we engage young people in decision making in our organization with racial equity in mind.
Yeah, that's great. So that's all I have for right now. I want to open up Q&A while we still have time for that. You'll notice that there is a box on the bottom of your screen for the Q&A, so feel free to submit any question you like. No question is too basic. I do have one to sort of kick us off here, which is, what are some of the key issues right now that Treehouse is working on besides the ones that you mentioned, and how can people get involved to help?
Absolutely. One of the key things that's come up actually since the onset of COVID is that, we in Washington, many of you may not know that we have extended foster care. So young people can opt in at 18 to stay in foster care through age 21, which has been actually a report released, I think just last month, has really shown that extended foster care has positive impacts on education outcomes, on income, on use of public systems. And so we were pretty sure that's what it was going to tell us. And we were excited to see that the evidence is pointing in that way. But during this time, as I was saying, our young people have been among the first to lose their jobs, which then is leading to possible loss of their housing. And this, in our minds, is not a time to be exiting young people from extended foster care, presumably into homelessness. And so we have a group of about 200 young people who will turn 21 during this year. And we've been calling on the governor to place a moratorium on exiting youth from foster care during this time. And I'm not sure that's the solution that the governor will select, but I do know that there is work to ensure that every young person that is leaving foster care is doing so with a plan and housing. That maybe extending foster care itself isn't the right answer past 21, but making sure that students or youth have the resources that they need to be to make sure that we're not exiting young people from systems into homelessness. So I'd say that's one of the primary ones. The other thing we've been very openly advocating with, along with our colleagues that serve homeless students, is encouraging the superintendent and also the governor to use some of the CARES Act dollars, federal stimulus dollars, to really invest in the needs of students who are furthest from opportunity, including students in foster care and students experiencing homelessness. This is really an opportunity to, and sometimes we've heard it's not all that much money, but it is if you're actually targeting it to be used to advance equity, educational equity for the students who are furthest from opportunity.
Great.
So those are a couple of things we've been working on. And in terms of how people can get involved, we do have an online advocacy tool that you can sign up to get alerts when we are calling for public action to advance issues related to youth and foster care. So we did absolutely invite you to go to our website at treehouseforkids.org and get on that list.
All right, great. Well, I have a question here about reopening schools, and it goes like this. Are you advocating with the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction around reopening schools to make sure groups already impacted are not even more greatly impacted by whatever is ahead, including youth and foster care? How can we help advocate for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we were somewhat disappointed with the guidance that came out from OSPI. There was not a lot of mention of youth in foster care or youth experiencing homelessness, our most mobile kind of at-risk students, and how districts can really step up to serve them better during this time. So we are calling on the superintendent to issue additional guidance and have offered, we have a collective impact project that we are working on with 4 state agencies, including OSPI and 4 statewide nonprofits, and have offered that our work group could actually be the ones to help partner with OSPI and DCYF to come up with that guidance that includes both how districts could spend those dollars effectively to impact those outcomes, as well as very concrete steps that foster care liaisons and support staff in buildings, school counselors, could support the needs of foster youth and their families during this time.
That's great. So here's another question. You mentioned the importance of high school graduation and perhaps extending foster care, or at least the need for supports. What happens after people leave the foster care system? Why is it important for them to get supports after they leave, or what kind of supports are even available after they leave?
Yeah, it is somewhat unusual, when young people leave foster care. Generally, what happens is there's a tradition, it's kind of a trial return home period of about 6 months, and then if everything is going okay, then the case is closed, and the state kind of steps back out of the students' lives. At Treehouse, we've made the decision to continue our supports beyond a youth achieving what's called permanency. So they're either returning to their birth home, or they're maybe being adopted, or staying in a long-term guardianship. Because just because they achieve permanency doesn't mean their education needs have been met. So we continue to serve those young people to and through beyond high school graduation.
Okay, great. I have a question here. What is your Launch Success program?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we surveyed our young people and said, what do you need from us? And the resounding answer was, stay with us longer. What we found was that we had a fairly intensive education support model that included, one significant adult in continual relationship with that young person, kind of an intensity of service. We're seeing young people weekly, we're in communication sometimes more often than that, and kind of an intrusiveness, that we're very proactively reaching out on a regular basis. And so what we were finding was, when young people graduated high school, we sort of had this idea that we would do kind of a warm handoff to whatever their post-high school plan was. But essentially what we were doing is removing all three of those elements all at the same time: the relationship, the intensity, and the intrusiveness. And that our young people were not ready for that level of kind of pullback. And so we decided to pilot a new strategy called Launch Success, which we stay with our young people longer and continue to provide maybe less intensive support, but regular check-ins, and also financial resources to help them bridge the gap to what post-secondary education, to job training. Some of our youth decide to go immediately into the job, into the workforce, or pursue apprenticeships or other training programs, or go to college. And so we want to make sure that, what we sometimes find is, like, one significant hiccup, a car that breaks down, getting evicted, is often the thing that will derail a young person's kind of post-high school plan. And if we can provide a little bit of support into young adulthood, that not only protects the investment that we've made all the way along, but also really makes sure that those young people are ready to transition to independence.
That's great. Well, speaking of investments, the last question I have is, right now Treehouse is not able to accept clothing and other essential goods because of the pandemic. What is other ways, or the best way even, for people to get involved who want to help?
Yeah, so certainly you can visit our website and consider making a financial gift during this time. We actually are still doing things like providing clothing. We're actually doing it kind of via personal shopping. While youth are not visiting our store, we're actually getting requests and sort of lists of items that youth need, and we're doing kind of personal shopping and shipping things, or having a pickup or drop off kind of situation. We've also launched a virtual tutoring program since the pandemic started. We did provide some of that support before the pandemic, but this is really a new strategy where quite a few of our young people are benefiting from homework help, tutoring on content to supplement what school districts are offering right now. And so we are looking for volunteers to help us do that if people are interested. So, and then of course I mentioned, I always make a case for people to help join in advocating for the needs of young people through our advocacy tool.
Great. Well, thank you, Don. This is great. And thanks to all of you for participating and submitting questions. If your question was not answered, you can visit treehouseforkids.org, which I'll also share in the follow-up email that you'll receive in about 24 hours. Also, League of Education Voters has gathered resources available in communities across Washington state to help us get through this difficult time. Everything from meal services to distance learning resources, school guidance from the State Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, college and scholarship supports, mental health supports, internet and technology resources, childcare, and employment resources. You'll find our COVID-19 resources page on our website, educationvoters.org. Our next LEVinar is Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, June 30th. We're honored to feature award-winning author, educator, and public speaker, Reverend Dr. Jennifer Harvey, on raising anti-racist white kids, steps on parenting for racial justice. She'll talk about how to teach white children to notice race and how to address racism when they encounter it. She'll also answer your questions. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, click on events, and then lunchtime webinars. I'll also send registration information in a follow-up email. Also, on Wednesday, July 15th, Dr. Pooja Tandon of Seattle Children's and University of Washington, Seattle Public Schools parent Linnea Westerland, who's the author of Discovering Seattle Parks, a Local's Guide, and KOWFM education reporter Ann Dornfeld will discuss the mental health benefits of recess and PE programs in schools, outline what we need now to support school districts in Washington state to incorporate exercise programs into curriculum during this time of hybrid or distance learning, and they'll also answer your questions. So that will also be in the follow-up email you'll be getting. Thanks so much to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to me, Arik at educationvoters.org, and my name is spelled A-R-I-K. That'll also be in the follow-up email. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and will also be sent to you in the follow-up email. Feel free to share the recording with your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each one of us has the right to feel safe and valued. Together, we'll fight for a world in which true educational and economic equity exists. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars. And Dawn, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Arik.